So the main aim of today's workshop is to integrate the understanding of our issues and defenses in our personal relationships by raising awareness of how they are played out. So personal relationships are likely to uncover our issues and defenses and expose our separate realities. This is, in fact, their job. So the difference, just a very brief recap, the difference between an issue and a defense. An issue is an emotion or a problem with which we are currently struggling. So examples could be low self-esteem, perfectionism, addiction, anger, grief, any number of difficulties that we are currently needing, that need our attention. An emotional defense, on the other hand, it works to prevent feeling these painful and sometimes difficult emotions, and it maintains the status quo. So we don't really have to look too deeply into what's troubling us. So some of those defenses are healthier than others. So for example, exercise, a good sense of humor are the healthy defense mechanisms. And the not so healthy ones, but also, you know, not terribly abnormal either, because obviously we're all human, would be denial and projection, for example. So I explained in a little bit more detail about these in my last presentation. So perhaps at the end, if anyone has any questions about these, we can look at it more then. So a healthy couple relationship, I believe, is the foundation for a healthy family life. Obviously, relationships are all far from perfect. Each person brings their own history, their own ideas, opinions, values, issues, defenses, and they, of course, don't always match. This doesn't necessarily mean that a relationship is bound for conflict. On the contrary, differences provide opportunities to understand, respect, and even tolerate opposing views, values, and cultures. They teach us to communicate better so that our relationships are able to grow. So achieving better understanding of one another and learning to communicate better can assist families navigate change and unavoidable external stresses. So they basically create a buffering effect on life stresses, good relationships. This term EQ, so we've all heard of IQ, and EQ has made quite a kind of an impact, I think, in workplaces. They refer to a person's ability to understand and manage their emotions, as well as recognize the feelings of others and respond appropriately. So on a more practical level, even though we are all working together in our family relationships, it's also clear that we have very different responsibilities and we are doing things differently. So this forces us to take responsibility for our separate selves on practical as well as emotional levels. So what I always say is our feelings and what we do about them is our responsibility as an individual. We don't make it another person's responsibility to help us respond differently or kind of fix up our issues. We are all responsible for ourselves, and our family and our partners give us support, and they maybe suggest ways in which we could have responded better. But more about that later on in this presentation. So the emotional, mental, and physical stability of each individual contributes to the overall stability of the couple and the family. Of course, any pre-existing vulnerabilities and conditions such as depression or anxiety can potentially unsettle, destabilize partnerships and families. Relationships are very often tested So here are some examples of when relationships are tested. So any developmental milestone, such as the birth of a child, a relocation, a major life change, such as retirement, can place undue stress on the couple or the family. Over time, differences or habits that were perhaps once endearing may become irritating. Sometimes there's more specific issues, such as lack of support from the extended family, an extramarital affair, or loss of attraction. These can all trigger problems in a relationship. Other times there's a gradual disintegration of communication and caring. You know, when people say they're living separate lives, they've just gone their separate ways. So one may hope relationship troubles go away on their own, but generally if left in quite a dysfunctional state, they usually only get worse. So whatever the cause of relationship issues, they can lead to all sorts of other problems. So on an individual level, all the symptoms of troubled relationships include distress, sadness, worry, fear, and over time they can lead to more chronic physical or psychological problems, such as insomnia, anxiety, or depression. Those of you who were present at my last webinar, I remember explaining the difference between a mental disorder and an issue. So a mental disorder is when difficulties go unprocessed and unresolved. So you have feelings like sadness, frustration, general unhappiness. And if we don't process our feelings or work with them, that we can shut them down and they become stuck, and then they have the potential to become disorders such as depression or anxiety. So conflictual relationships at home also can cause problems at work and affect other family members, friendships, all sorts of things. So how do our issues manifest? Sometimes we choose a particular kind of partner for our romantic relationships because there's an unconscious attempt to heal some parts of oneself. So in other words, we attract what we are needing to heal ourselves. So a partner could mirror insecurities in a way that pushes the other to have to acknowledge their own fears, their own vulnerabilities. So when there is conflict, there's often the struggle we have with ourselves with making what's called the growth choice or the fear choice. And one is invited to even greater participation in the relationship when we make the growth choice. However, this anticipation of encountering all our old fears and issues that we've, buried and we felt that we have more or less resolved, and having to tolerate this and feel it all coming up makes participation in our healing really fraught. It can be very difficult. So a relational pause is what happens, what we can create when there's a difficult situation, when we're struggling in the relationship, perhaps an argument, and by taking a step back, arguments can be diffused. It gives us an opportunity to just look at the surface meanings in a different kind of way. So this detachment also allows for a more thoughtful response as opposed to a triggered reaction. So we want to respond in relationships, not react. There's a difference. So we have that lower impulse, that urge, especially when we're triggered, to react to any insult, ignorance, or sarcasm with the same. So when we step back, when we take a pause, a moment to just not respond, not react, this impulse we have is bypassed. It also allows the one who was upsetting us the chance to pull back and also think. So when we are triggered, we're not responding from our frontal lobe. So our frontal lobe is the part of our brain that is responsible for healthy reasoning, higher thinking, and conscious awareness. So we're responding from a different part of our brain, and they call it the reptilian brain, where we just react without that sort of higher consciousness. So navigating our own difficult feelings also helps us gain confidence in our own abilities to provide for ourselves what we sometimes hope from another and what we're seeking in others. For example, we feel alone not only when we are not understood by others, but also when we do not understand ourselves, when we are not connecting with ourselves. Okay, so Martin Buber was an existential philosopher, and he helped shape a very important movement in psychology with his ideas on encountering the other person. So he calls it the relational space. And this relational space is roughly described as the place where the subjectivity of one person comes into contact with the subjectivity of the other. So this is the place where a relationship is created. And this space he sees as being truly authentic. It's one where two people truly engage one another in the present moment and show up fully for one another. So ideally, this is what we hope to achieve in our relationships, in our families. He calls it the art of sincere and honorable relationship, which I thought was quite poetic. So then we have the absent presence. So the absent presence refers to a poor relational space. So as opposed to that authenticity, fully showing up, engaging the other person, the absent presence is the opposite of that. And the domain of technology with diverted or divided consciousness actually leads to a host of all sorts of other issues, social, mental, and medical issues. So here's a nice example. So in a retirement home for the elderly, Will enters the veranda in search of two close friends. He is in luck, they are both present. So often in retirement homes, the elderly folk, they become like family to one another. Because often families are actually living in other parts of the globe. And in retirement homes, the people who are in your immediate surroundings, your close friends, become like family to you. So he's quite pleased, both his two close friends are present. However, one is lost to her newly upgraded cell phone, and the other is engrossed in a technical manual for a pair of new headsets. So neither even notice Will's presence. Frustrated, he is left to stare silently into space. So young or old, we can all identify with the scene. I mean, how often do we enter a room to find our family, our friends, our work colleagues absorbed by their computer screens, some kind of technological device, cell phone, perhaps even a book. Sometimes they welcome us without hesitation, but sometimes there's a pause, accompanied even by a look of slight irritation. And at other times, our presence may go completely unnoticed. So we are present in the room with the other, but simultaneously we are rendered absent. We have, in fact, been erased by an absent presence. Okay, so this can be a bit alarming. So these are all the issues that excessive cell phone use can bring about. So excessive cell phone, internet and social media, overuse and addiction is associated with a host of issues. And we're pretty much all aware of this, but I think it's not a bad thing to just get the occasional reminder of why it is really important to have times during the day that we completely switch our phones off or we put it aside. And I know a lot of you, especially people who are kind of connected to their businesses, running businesses in really important positions of responsibility and authority. It's very hard to just put something aside. But if I think about when I was growing up as a child, when somebody came home on a weekend, on a Friday, they were unreachable until Monday morning. So generally people at the office didn't always have our home numbers. There was no cell phones at that time. I'm giving my age away, but that's fine. And these days we are just constantly plugged in. So it actually becomes confusing. Are we addicted to our work, to our cell phone devices, to our screens, or are we just really hardworking and being super responsible? I don't have the perfect answer there, but I think perhaps we can maybe even have a chat about this at the end of the presentation during question and answer time. But what I can say for sure is that there are a host of issues associated with overuse. So let's go from the top. We have avoidance. So excessive cell phone use I see as an issue and a defense. So it's an issue if we are addicted. And it's a defense in that it helps us to avoid thoughts, feelings, memories, and physical sensations. So you literally can switch off and get fully absorbed in whatever is on the screen. And then you lose that mindfulness, that ability to check in with yourself, even if you've had lunch or, how you're feeling. Just kind of disconnect from that. It can lead to family dysfunction. And again, this sort of chicken and egg scenario. So I will imagine a family that has a bit of dysfunction enter into the picture, everybody's sitting with their cell phones. It just kind of worsens the situation. So if there's already any pre-existing vulnerabilities, then excessive cell phone use will obviously just make things a lot worse. So it can lead to interpersonal conflicts where people disagree on the values around that, poor academic work performance, ironically enough, because often we're on our phones to kind of check in with work colleagues, and emotion regulation difficulties, so it kind of lowers your EQ. In adolescence, there's been a correlation with body image issues. Obviously, we've all heard of cyberbullying, depression and social anxiety. Among students, there's been a correlation with high measures of worry and anger and excessive reassurance-seeking behaviors. Like checking in with your friends constantly on your phone. You don't take relational pauses. There's always somebody available to chat to or to send cute little emojis to kind of try and boost your confidence. So you're not really looking at how can I deal with this better. Poor communication skills. There's a preference for a lot of people to communicate their emotions through texting rather than verbal communication. So how often do people maybe have an argument that morning over breakfast and they go to work and they start texting their feelings to the other person? You said this and why didn't you say that? And I'm so upset with you. So this decrease of face-to-face interactions in the overall population has led to an increase in levels of loneliness and shyness, unsurprisingly. also leads to sleep problems, poorer sleep quality, insomnia, reduced fitness, weight gain, and a higher perceived stress. Impaired attention, reduced numerical processing capacity, increased impulsivity and hyperactivity. So these are all scientific tests, research that has reached this conclusion. Then chronic neck and hand pain, so higher levels of cervical disc degeneration and texting thumb tendonitis, arthritis, and even carpal tunnel syndrome in the dominant hand. So there's actually more issues, but I thought I'd leave it at this. Okay, so ingredients for stability in families. So let's look at how to improve things. So healthy connection and communication is generally characterized by authenticity, mutuality, directness, and presence. And I'm taking this again from Buber's description of the relational space. Then there's another psychologist called Daniel Stern, and he spoke of attunement being so important. So this is developing a sense of self with other in response to healthy attunement. So when parents are attuned to their children's needs and to one another, that leads to increased self-esteem, and a child especially can respond to them being able to connect with them with their own feelings. So if the parents can, for example, be attuned to a child's state of distress and try and work with them empathically, the child can then learn, okay, this is how I can manage myself. This is also connected to the concept of mirroring. So others serve as a mirror that reflects back a sense of self-worth and value. So people can validate us. We're not looking for rescuing, but support and validation. A good example of mirroring, so I always think of this lovely example of a parent teaching their child or helping a child learn to tie their shoelaces. So empathic attunement or mirroring. So the child's busy tying their shoelaces and they're struggling and they're just not getting it right. And the parents watching, but of course you don't want to jump in, you want them to also develop a little bit of tolerance for difficult feelings as well. So you're there and you watch and you say, gosh, that looks difficult. Maybe should I try and help you? Let's see if we can manage this together. So that would be mirroring. So you're mirroring the child is struggling. So what we call in psychology empathic failure, and often as parents we tend to think we are boosting our child's self-esteem, but it actually becomes an empathic failure. So an example of that would be you see your child struggling and the child's not quite getting it right, and you go, oh, you're such a clever little boy, look at you tying your shoelaces, you're so clever. And the child thinks, well, actually I'm not, I'm actually not getting this right. And so that can also develop a little bit of narcissism, where you boost the ego, but it's not authentic. So the authentic response is, I can see you trying very hard and it looks difficult. And it's not easy to do that, is it? Let's see if I can help you and let's figure this out together. So that's mirroring, that's an example of attunement. So on a practical level, creating opportunities for relational spaces, doing activities together at home. So any number of things that your family enjoys doing, board games, baking, gardening, building Lego. Apparently there's Lego that adults can build now. And I think my son's quite keen on getting one of those sets because he's got fond memories of building Lego with his dad or by himself when he was a child. So eating a meal a day together, that can be quite bonding. And obviously, if it's not going to be an opportunity for everybody to kind of lay into each other, often in cases of when I see young adults or teenagers with eating disorders, meal times were often fraught, and that was often when the parents were having a go at one another, and it was anything but relaxing and connecting and checking in with one another. And obviously this would be cell phone, not at the table. So for 1 hour, people leave their cell phones in a different place. Other ways of building rapport, checking in with one another, especially during difficult times, being aware of if somebody's struggling with something at school, at work. Knowing what's happening in other people's lives is really important. You don't have to have all the details, but just to know, okay, my child's struggling a bit socially, or something's going on at work and making dad a bit stressed. And then the last one, my last suggestion here, is family times, couple times, individual times are all important. So as a family, one needs to spend family time together. That could be they're having a meal together, or going on a family outing, or playing a board game. Then couple time is important. So I think it's really good modeling for the children in a household to see their parents going out on a date, or even just for a walk, or enjoying a quiet moment together with a cup of tea. And individual times. So everybody also needs to have their separate times. And that could mean it's cell phone time, or it's friendship time, or hobby time. So people need to learn to tolerate alone time and their own company as well. So in an ideal world, we can balance all of that, and I think that's really tricky. But I think if you feel the couple time needs strengthening, then you prioritize that. And if you feel the family needs to be strengthened, then maybe weekend outing is needed. I'm just going to this slide first before I go back to the reflections. So where do I seek help? So the acknowledgement of an ongoing chronic struggle, or being in emotional pain and severely stressed or distressed, is often the first step in seeking extra support. There's absolutely no shame in needing support. Every family, every couple, at some point in their life, probably will need therapy. We all go through difficulties. There's trauma that happens, loss, grief, and I think it's often a sign of strength to recognize that actually we need a bit of extra help here. So therapy can provide a safe, neutral space to start naming and understanding some of the issues and defenses which have been happening in the difficult situation. Because as I said earlier, people cope in different ways. Also, a couple or a family do not actually need to have a dysfunctional or very troubled relationship to seek support. It can help to strengthen bonds and deepen intimacy. Often used to see young couples or couples planning to get married for some premarital counseling. And that was really a way of them to just check in with themselves around their different expectations and hopes. And we ended up often doing really lovely work. So it can offer emotional and practical support to those who are anticipating big changes in their lives, such as having a baby, moving in together, or moving abroad. Sometimes people wait until a relationship has really become very dysfunctional before they go seek therapy, and often couples threaten one another with therapy, so it's not, so they end up coming to therapy. It's like, oh well, you know, she said that she'll divorce me if I don't come to therapy. And often when things are really at that point, therapy becomes a space where you consciously maybe decide to separate, but that's really the end of the road, and it should be only after everything else has been attempted. So my previous slide, reflections. Just a few questions just to help us look at ourselves. You know, often when there's an issue in the family or our romantic relationship, it's really important to check in with, well, what could I be contributing? What could I be doing differently? Is this something that I'm part of, or is this really the other person? And I just need to be a compassionate bystander and support them? Or do I need to also work something out here within myself? So what may be required of you emotionally to be present in a relationship? So if we go back to relational spaces, they sound lovely, but they're not always easy. You know, people often, anxiety or busyness keeps us from being fully calm and present in our relationships. So it may be helpful to look at what could be in the way, what could be holding me back. Do you need to compromise? What is needed? And often as we become aware of our own emotional issues, it becomes increasingly difficult then to hold on to it in a dysfunctional way. And by a dysfunctional way, I mean holding on to our kind of rigid, dysfunctional defense mechanisms. So once we're aware, we're allowing a space within us to be present in another way with this issue. So perhaps we could tolerate ourselves more, we could be more kind to ourselves, more, you know, self-love, self-compassion, as opposed to the same old defenses that we've been using for decades, whether it's work addiction, substance addiction, cell phone addiction, other defense mechanisms, suppression, denial. You know, those are not useful, especially if other people around us are giving us feedback or looking miserable. So quite importantly, how well can you handle a relational mismatch without going into distress? I think this links to EQ. How well can we tolerate our own feelings without freaking out, without reacting, without being too triggered? And if there's something that triggers us constantly, instead of trying to control the trigger, I guess that just stepping away, taking a relational pause and figuring out how you can better take care of yourself, as opposed to trying to control the other person too much. Just a final comment. For relationships to work well, each person must find ways to express themselves, to express their power that enhances rather than interferes with the relationship. So to be able to be assertive, to speak your truth without losing your temper. You know, we are allowed our feelings, we're allowed to be angry, but I think it's more useful to say, I'm feeling upset or I'm feeling angry, as opposed to losing our temper. Because then nothing's really very useful after that.